Very good morning. If you've just joined us now, South Africa has been steadily moving up the Global Terrorism Index ladder from being ranked 140 out of 162 countries in just 2010 to 48th place at the end of last year. Last week, it was reported that South African companies and individuals alike could be unwittingly funding terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab, Hezbollah, ISIS and Boko Haram. This was the stern warning of the head of business crime and forensics at Werksmans Attorneys, Hotz. Hotz claims to know of at least 2 fake NGOs previously based here in South Africa who raised money for orphans, but the money was instead being sent to Islamic terror organizations in the Middle East. According to Hotz, client confidentiality and the law prevents ongoing investigations being made public, making such occurrences go under the radar. Now, Hotz joins us in studio today to delve further into the matter. Morning.
Morning, Eben.
Has it been an interesting week? Have you had a bit of abuse on social media because of what you put forward last week?
I wouldn't say so, Eben. It all arose out of observing what for me was the first time in my entire life that I've seen so many world leaders gather together in that march in Paris after the catastrophe. And it was the first time that I saw so many people say, no, we cannot allow this to rule the world. And I then started looking into some research. Let the army and the security services deal with what they have to. But there's an issue of funding. How is this happening? And I then saw this amazing, unholy, convenient alliance that seems to have been formed between your traditional organized crime syndicates and terrorists. Different ideologies, same objective, we need money. The one for profit, the other one to fund terrorism. And then I started to look at areas. Where would this be easy picking, if I can use that terminology? And you then start to look at the psychology of, well, let's go to areas where there's a perception of lawlessness, lax law enforcement, etc. And lo and behold, you find that we are in a very vulnerable position.
That's the next question. We've moved down the global list, as I said, from being ranked 140 out of 160 odd countries to now being in the top 50. Why would terrorist organizations find South Africa and maybe even Southern Africa so attractive?
Bearing in mind that it's unlawful, therefore what you want to do is you want to conduct yourself under the radar, so to speak. What you then need to do is realize that you're dealing with tremendously intelligent people, and you will find that there is the creation of corporations with this veneer of legitimacy to conduct business with companies here who may not really realize with whom they're doing business and where the profits that are being generated from this business are being channeled to.
I want us to look at a clip because I spoke to an expert on Nigeria, Boko Haram and terrorism in that part of the world. And I was talking about importing terrorism here into South Africa, much aligned to what we're talking about. Let's have a look at this clip quickly, and then you can give me a sort of reaction to it.
And that tells you that, of course, you have terrorist cells existing in South Africa. And, of course, they have warned South Africa that if you should get involved in the Nigerian case, we will attack you. And we are likely to see that happen because these people don't just give empty threats. They actually carry out their threats. So, in my view, the cells are already existing in South Africa, but they remain dormant because South Africa have not been active in the Middle East, have not been active in many of the areas, and they feel that their interests are being threatened. So, in getting involved in the Nigerian crisis may likely activate the dormant cells that exist in South Africa.
But that's the legitimate threat to South Africa of dormant cells, Boko Haram cells. You were talking in particular about being here in South Africa and the threat of those cells being activated as soon as a country like South Africa steps into the breach, into a conflict like they have in the northeast of Nigeria, Somalia, anywhere else in the world. What do you say to that? Do you think that's a legitimate threat?
I think the concern is as follows. There's a school of thought that says, if we kind of turn a blind eye, we're not going to fall victim. So we may necessarily suspect that there are these groups here, but let's not proceed too vociferously to uncover whether they are here. That's the one school of thought. The other school of thought is what I observed the majority of the world leaders saying on that march. No, How do we ever allow society where all we want to do is live together in peace and harmony? How do we allow these massacres to occur without the majority of the people saying, no, we need to band together to try and stop this?
Let's come to the funding year in South Africa. In the intro, you spoke about a couple of case studies. Could you give us an example of how such a case played out here in South Africa with a funding scenario? Because I don't think people are aware that they are really at risk.
Let's take a very simple example, and let's go further afield. There's an Eastern European cyber syndicate who, you may recall reading last year, JP Morgan was hit dramatically.
Yeah.
They in fact had to spend £165 million on improving their cybersecurity measures. In South Africa, as at the beginning of this year, there have already been companies whose client confidential information has been taken captive. Ransoms are being demanded by these cyber criminals, and where is that funding being used for? We know that in Latin America, there's a synergy between the organized crime syndicates, the drug syndicates, and the Hezbollah organizations. So the fact that you're paying a ransom to a cyber criminal, do you know really where those funds are being used at the end of the day? I was on a talk show the other evening, and straight after I'd said that on the talk show, the first guest who phoned in said his company has just been taken captive by these same cyber criminals, and he's in the automotive industry. So it's real, it's live. People need to be proactive. They can't just think it's not going to happen to them.
Have you had any official response to what you've put out, or even response from an organization like, say, the Institute for Security Studies?
I've read some interesting replies. They seem to be supporting what I'm saying. I've also received some interesting emails from as far afield as the US, from some federal prosecutors in the US who are dealing in cybercrime, organized crime, terrorist funding, who are very interested with the fact that this is now being raised now. And they've been asking to speak to me, to try and pick my brain, to see how these things are happening.
In conclusion, what does the law in South Africa say, and how does it protect us, and what are the warning signs people should be looking out for?
Eben, we've got laws. South Africa has committed itself to saying no to terrorism. We've got all the laws in place. But we need to work in partnership. Corporations need to be vigilant. They need to be proactive. They need to be very proactive in knowing who they're hiring right at the outset. Don't just do a box tick to say, yes, I've looked at somebody's ID, I've looked at somebody's passport, I've looked at somebody's company documentation. Actually try and investigate, do you really know who the people are with whom you are transacting? That way, you safeguard the crown jewels. After all, a board is put there to safeguard the crown jewels for the shareholders. You've got to do your job and be proactive.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Bernard. That's the head of business crime and forensics at Werksmans Attorneys, Bernard Hotz, talking to us about terrorism funding, not just in South Africa, but all around the world. Thank you for joining us this day. Interesting. I bet you didn't know that you might be funding terrorist organizations by simply giving 10 Rand to an organization for orphans. Have a look at it before you do it next time. But yeah, some of your views. Let's have a look at the tweets. At SABC Newsroom, of course, is where we interact with you. Price Forbes SA says, okay, let's see what this mining in Daba is all about. Of course, mining in Daba gets underway. It got underway in Cape Town yesterday, and we'll have a live crossing there after our first break. Lesia says, mine bosses are having a barn fight while the true owners of the wealth and land remain destitute. It's a farce. The Freedom Charter is a farce, he says. 35th IGC says, looking forward to hearing Mining Minister at the Mining in Daba this morning. Yes, that should be very interesting. We'll be live with Nompusi Ziba shortly. Marty says, and what in the world does Tony Blair know about South African mining that he has to be the keynote speaker? Well, Britain has exported most of the wealth out of South Africa over the last 200 odd years. Today's picture of the day comes from Ultras T4. It's captioned, at least 14 fans killed in Egypt after Zamalek fans clashed with police. There you have a picture of the police firing some sort of weapon at the crowds advancing. That's our viewer pick of the day. I can tell you that number of 14 has been moved up to 22, been moved back to 19. We don't have an official confirmation as to how many people died, but it looks to be around the 20 mark. Unconfirmed at the moment, 22. Let's have a look at